You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast.
You're listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. My name is Shawn Wilkie, and along with my awesome co-host, we interview the innovators in this space every week. Ivan, go ahead and introduce today's guest.
Hi, I'm Ivan Zach, and I'm excited to introduce Dr. Jessica Vogelsang. We're going to talk about telemedicine in the COVID era. On the business side, Jessica is an author, speaker, media expert, and founder of Pawcurious Media. She's a podcast co-host of What the Woo. DDM from University of California, is a veterinary acupuncturist, certified pet loss counselor, and certified veterinary journalist. Pawcurious is one of the very first veterinary blogs on the web, established in 2009. On the personal side of things, Jessica is an accomplished gingerbread architect. She grew up in New England with her last episode, Taffy, and she is an author of the memoir, All Dogs Go to Kevin. Welcome to the show, Jessica. We're happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
So we will kick off with the conversation about how are you related to telemedicine and how did you get into the channel that we met you through?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I started Pawcurious in 2009, and so that's a blog. It's not really telemedicine, but it fits in that sort of infant space of virtual care, of providing advice and talking to people online. And so I've been involved in this online space for 11 years. And so about 2014, I was following what was happening in telemedicine, and I was trying to get my colleagues involved in the conversation. Like, hey, at some point, I assume we're going to be wanting to explore how telemedicine can apply to veterinary medicine. And as you probably know, like people would just laugh you out of the room. Like, we don't do that. We're never going to do that. That's never going to happen. And so there was a very small but persistent group of people that wanted to see telemedicine happen in the veterinary space. And we all just kind of floated around until March of 2020. And I had started a Facebook group in 2018, the Veterinary Telemedicine Facebook group. There were two members in the group for 2 years. And then I opened up the group in March, and we became 3,000 members almost overnight. Just everybody all of a sudden decided, okay, it's time. So it's been an interesting sort of rocket launch with telemedicine.
That's so interesting, Jessica. I think, Ivan, we met around, I think it was around 2017 at the Veterinary Innovation Summit. And the theme of that particular Veterinary Innovation Summit should have been telemedicine. And everything was telemedicine. It was, there was apps for video calling and chat and consultation. And there was a lot of buzz around it, but it literally seemed to be getting no traction. And it would be interesting just for you to kind of enlighten our listeners kind of what that journey looked like from your perspective and from that telemedicine group's perspective on Facebook. How do we go from 2017, where it was this novel idea that nobody really wanted to use or nobody was really that interested in? It seemed like a good idea, but not really something that was going to get adoption. And then, we get to current day where we have COVID. And if you could just maybe take us on a journey from your perspective of how we got from there to where we're at today.
Well, I think, it's always been something that people that are familiar with business and are familiar with the consumer space understood was going to happen. Consumers want telemedicine for themselves, they want it for their pets. And it's really just the profession that's been reluctant to do it. All of these medical professions have always been slow to adopt change. And so I think for anybody who's at the Innovation Summit, it is frustrating to say, hey, here's this great idea, here's this great solution, and then nobody will take you up on it. And really very little changed in this amount of time. There were a few intrepid explorers who were exploring these options. They were offering asynchronous communication and text messaging and chat to clients, and people loved it. But most clinics they just didn't want to deal with it. And so you had these very bloated, inefficient communication structures where you want to reach your vet, you got to pick up the phone and call them and get put on hold just like you did in 1984, and it was a really crummy consumer experience. And so with COVID, with these mandates that you have to stay at home, you have to use telemedicine whenever possible, people did it because they felt like they had to. Not necessarily because they wanted to. And so I think there was a stat from AVMA that came out that said 30% of clinics now say that they have telemedicine or they're using telemedicine, but I'm not really sure that's true. I think maybe 35% of clinics got a telemedicine platform that sits there and they're still dealing with the vast majority of their clients and calls over the phone, which is fascinating, because this was sort of the golden opportunity for all of these communication inefficiencies in your clinic to be explored and solved, and they're just too busy.
Yeah, and we had a couple guests on the show here that were talking about how adaptive the industry is. And I'm going to say we're not. And I'm a veterinarian, so I think I'm allowed to say that we're adaptive when we have to. I think
Yeah,
we're lazy
yeah,
because if we wanted to, we could, these platforms existed, we could do it easily. We could streamline. If you look at the productivity of all the companies since the COVID, nobody wants to go back into the office because people became more productive, they became more focused, they created work environments at home. We just never thought that we could be that productive. So everybody adopted. I'll tell a story because I had to face it basically right now. I hurt my back and I saw the neurologist right before COVID. What happened this Sunday, I hurt my neck.
mm,
So I went and I did it, and I'm in Ukraine. So I went and I did an MRI, and I didn't want to leave home in the office, and I didn't want to spend time on driving somewhere seeing the doctor. So when last time the COVID hit, I called them and I said, "Can I do a follow-up appointment over the phone?" And they said, "No, you have to be here." And then I said, "Listen, we did the diagnostics, we did everything. I just need to talk to the doctor while the doctor is looking at the results of diagnostics. I'll pay to you remotely, and then we'll just do a telemedicine consult." So they were refusing and resisting. I ended up convincing them. So I had to call her today. And when I called the office, they said, "Would you like an online appointment or would you like a physical one?" I'm like, well, how difficult was it last time? Was I the one who invented it for you? So
yeah,
now everybody's adopting to it, and I think it's great. But I think we were lazy. The one thing that I think that is difficult is getting used to new workflows.
yeah,
And what veterinarians didn't want to do is to change their habits. So I couldn't see, and I'm a vet. I couldn't see the veterinarian thinking, "I'm going to work, I'm there for 8 hours, and then I have to dedicate time to be in online, offline." I think it's as easy. Even if you right now, if you offered, what kind of appointment would you like? Is it an online or would you like to do it by coming in? And you can do more appointments, way more appointments if you're doing them online. I talked to one of the founders of one of the telemedicine platforms. He said that none of the appointments last more than 7 minutes.
yeah,
You come into the hospital, you'll be talking about their neighbors, about everything on the planet, and then you'll have that 30-minute appointment because you were chatting. On the phone, on the telemedicine platform, people are focused and they get right to the point. So, what do you think about our industry getting used to these new workflows? Are we there yet? Are we still working on it? Or do we understand that we have to do it that way? We'll get there faster.
yeah. I think the answer to all that's no. There are a few companies that have figured it out, right? I'm sure you've probably spoken with like Bond, Modern Animal, those people who've built these workflows from the ground up, and that's the future. That's the only way we're going to go anywhere. Not only because, like you said, it's more efficient, but it's a better customer experience. Like that's great for everybody. Like you said, like I honestly don't want to spend 3 hours going to the doctor to talk about something stupid either. If we could just handle it quickly over the phone, and this is going to be a sink or swim thing for the profession. And they don't see it right now. We don't see it right now because everybody's so busy, and people are continuing to go to you because they don't have a choice. But eventually they are. And you're not going to be the one they choose. And to your point about, vets being resistant to change, I think there's a lot of that. And I think there's also this sense that we're so reluctant to delegate. There's so much of this visit when you try and think, I have to be there, I have to have my fingers involved in every aspect of this visit, every interaction with the client has to happen in these walls. And I think you had Erica on earlier. You don't. There's so much that can be handled online. Like, really, okay, sure, you probably do need the physical exam, in a lot of cases, but that's only one little tiny part. Like the rest of the communications can happen offline. And frankly, a lot of it can happen with your tech who's begging begging to be a bigger part of your team. And I think that's a big part of it too. When you look, the telemedicine conversation so frequently revolves around that very, very small piece of the pie. That's the diagnosis and prescribing. But so much of the communication needs can be taken care of by someone else. The follow-up calls, the questions, the how do I give this insulin injection again? And a lot of that is an unwillingness, I think, to better leverage our staff. So there's a lot. It is going to have to be sort of redesigned from the ground up to really be what it needs to be in the future.
So I've got a question for both of you. Ivan, with your experience in kind of workflow optimization and all the work that you've done at SmartFlow, why is this so difficult for veterinary professions to want to see the light? And why, in Jessica's opinion, is that even with COVID, even when we had this golden opportunity to adopt this technology, and I might push you a little bit there, Jessica, because we've got lots of people that we've had and their telemedicine businesses have been skyrocketing. So I think there has been a lot of adoption, but not maybe enough. But the question to both of you is, with all of this workflow optimization that we've done and being able to re-engineer the veterinary experience, why can't veterinarians see the benefit to them in technology like this?
To your point, yeah, of course, there are people that are doing it, and I think you're probably self-selecting an audience of innovators to begin with. I'm talking about sort of the big picture, right? The people that you run into in conferences, the people that are showing up in the Facebook group. By and large, the people that are doing it successfully now are going to be the model for the future. But as a whole, this industry is very resistant to it, and part of the problem, at least here in the States, is the leadership's not interested in it. And so this is sort of a top down thing, and we have problems in California. The state board thinks that telemedicine is a crock and they don't want it. So when there's all these barriers, I don't have time, I'm busy, things are fine, I barely have enough time to eat during the day. Why would I even bother doing it when my state board doesn't let me do it? That we're sort of creating a lot of our own problems here too. Certainly in places like Ontario, where you have a much less hostile environment, it's going to be a lot easier to take those risks. And so, unfortunately, I think we're still in that being dragged kicking and screaming sort of situation in some areas, and we just have to rely on our friends in Canada to show us how it's done.
Yeah, they actually did adopt it really early in Ontario. But I think that it's having experience to put, let's say, SmartFlow in about 600 hospitals, we understood the pain point. Right now, there's no pain point. It's sort of like an added service. And then you have to think, how are you going to charge for it? And then veterinarians are terrible at charging for things because they want to discount everything. So then what they end up doing is they're doing this telemedicine thing and they're not charging for it. I talked to a couple of consolidators. They said, as soon as the COVID hit, we implemented telemedicine across. And then eventually they look at the numbers, and the veterinarians, when they don't know how to charge for it, we
Yeah.
didn't learn in vet school how to charge for telemedicine. It was not part of my class, and I was an A student, so I'm not going to do it. So basically, I think that the problem is there's no pain point in my current workflow that would require to have telemedicine solution. Well, right now there is a pain point. And again, the pain point is more right now in the financial model, not necessarily in the visit, because I can be a top-down approach to my customers, my clients, and say, you want to see me, you got to be in the clinic. And I used to do that when I was one veterinarian on the whole Vancouver Island, overnight, your vet, and that was the deal. And it was like, you don't like me, I'm the only vet here, so there, deal with me. So I guess
Yeah.
that approach, it's different now. And then right now, if I do want to talk to my clients, and if I value what's happening in the financial aspect of the clinic, because right now the dynamics that are changing around the employment for veterinarians as well, what we see on the side of relief work, it's very
Yeah.
interesting because veterinarians were, it's a luxury for the clinics to have abundance of veterinarians. The whole problem with the industry right now is that the consolidators are struggling. They can't find the vets to work for them. And right now, what I'm hearing from the software products that are building the relief vet platforms, they're finding that there's way more vets right now looking for work. So all of a sudden it's becoming a pain point, and all of a sudden you start to adapt to things to find more clients. So now I think that the pain point is more prominent, so we're looking for a solution and we're adapting. But I think it's just, again, it's if you're comparing to my experience with the software, we knew the pain point and we addressed it and we went with solving the problem. Here there was no problem before, so we were not solving for something specific.
I think that is a really interesting point, and I think some of the reason that people are not having this successful adoption is, like you said, like telemedicine is a solution in search of a problem, and that's when the focus is on live video. There's so much other stuff you can do. I think a lot of the clinics that are very happy with their use of virtual care or telemedicine are using more of the asynchronous communication, using the text messaging. If they really don't want to charge clients for stuff, instead of getting on that 30-minute chit chat conversation, send a quick text when it's convenient for you, and you've really just made your workflow more efficient. But to your point about veterinarians as well, I think there's a lot of underemployment in the veterinary space. There's a lot of veterinarians out there, and they're not maybe working as much as they'd like to. But I know specifically from my experience in my cohort, you have a lot of working parents who don't necessarily want to be gone, 60 hours a week if they don't have to. And if there were an option for them to work remotely, you would you would have such an easier time finding veterinarians, giving them those more flexible work options. And it's not offered at all. It doesn't exist, and there's no reason it doesn't have to. If you create more of that virtual workspace, I think you would find a lot of people are perfectly happy to, understanding that maybe it's not going to generate as much revenue. I mean, we have veterinarians who are making $25 an hour working for tele-advice lines. Clearly, they're going to be, they'll take what they can get. So I think that's just an untapped resource for this group.
Jessica, I think it's so interesting that you said the people that have adopted telemedicine successfully are going to be the leaders tomorrow. And I was reminded of a call just yesterday with Critter Care Animal Hospital in Houston. They're one of our clients at Talkatoo, and I called and I was on hold waiting for the doctor. And there was a message that said they now offer curbside pickup and also telemedicine consults. And they gave a simple URL to go to schedule a telemedicine consult. And I was thinking to myself, if I'm waiting on hold to schedule an appointment and there is a path to get to an answer right away, what a convenient way. Now, I'm not in Houston, but what do you think about this idea of, geographic barriers? I know that there's VCPR, but what about this opportunity for companies that are going to do, like you just spoke about, use veterinarians from all over the world and really enhance that client experience? I think there's a massive opportunity, to change the way that veterinary medicine works, potentially permanently.
I think there's always going to be hiccups when it comes to anything involving specifically something that has a state licensure involved. Even if you call a national telemedicine advice line for yourself, they ask what state you're in because you have to find someone who's licensed in that area. And so I think there's always going to be some sort of geographic barrier unless you're willing to specifically limit yourself to advice, which is what a lot of the advice lines do. But there's a much bigger opportunity for small clinics understanding I'm only going to be able to service my clients, but I can offer them this worldwide pool of people who offer advice so that I don't have to be the one who's on the hook 24/7 when you have a question at 2 in the morning. You don't have to go on Google. People still want you to be their trusted source of information. And it doesn't necessarily have to come from you, but it can come from someone that you trust. And so there are so many opportunities out there. And I think everybody's just so swamped right now because they haven't taken advantage of telemedicine and they're on the phone all day that they just don't have the time to explore those solutions.
Well, I think also that you mentioned a really interesting point, and I was talking to some of these relief vet platforms. The very interesting opportunity is to create a pool of veterinarians that are specifically working on telemedicine.
Yep.
The one thing that you did mention that they charge $25. I actually think that if we're going to do that to our own profession, that's going to be bad because my advice in the clinic face to face is not worse than my advice remotely. I don't think that I'm becoming, twice less profitable or should be if I'm giving my advice through telemedicine. What are your thoughts as a sort of leader of the telemedicine community there? Should we be? I know everybody's pricing it cheaper. Why are we doing this?
Well, and that's specific to companies that just offer tele-advice. So they're not linked to a clinic, right? It's like when you call the Ask Vet or Whisker Docs, or you're someplace that you don't have the opportunity to convert that into an in-person visit. I think that's sort of the whole key there to monetizing it. Is there are actually some studies out showing that people are willing to pay more for the same advice from their own doctor versus a random one that you find online. That's on the human side, but there's no reason to think that doesn't translate to veterinary medicine. And so that's just it. There's always going to be someone out there who offers cheap advice. And we think because of that, clients aren't going to be willing to pay more to get it from us. And that's not true. So that kind of goes to your point. It's just we're not offering them any way to access us for that advice because we think they're not going to want to pay it. But the clinics that have done it have said, like across the board, clients are more than willing to do it. They're so thrilled. Thank you. Yeah, here's my wallet. And the clients who don't want to do it, great. You already said you're busy, get rid of them. Focus on the clients that you want.
Yeah, it's so interesting. A good friend of mine's a family physician, and they've seen a tremendous amount of change with COVID, and they've moved to telemedicine. And she said that she loves telemedicine because she can jam pack a day and take a day off. So she does 15-minute consults. I don't know how many in a day when she's doing her telemedicine day, but she uses the telemedicine almost as a triage for her in-person visits. It gives her human patients an opportunity to stay away if they're uncomfortable, and then she uses it to catch herself up. So I think that seems to me, not a veterinarian, but that seems to me to be what's in it for the veterinarian. And I think that's the way that veterinarians need to think about this. They need to see what's in it for them as well as what's in it for their clients, and take advantage of this new tool to help them, improve their work-life balance potentially, or their profitability. Like Ivan said, I think the advice is as valuable. And I know myself as a consumer of veterinary medicine that I would be willing to pay more for a telemedicine consult, because it means that I don't have to take the 2 hours out of my day to go home, go to the clinic, go home, go back to the office. It changes the whole dynamic, and I value my time. So I think that there's a lot of consumers that probably feel the same way.
Yeah, I think we need to get over this idea that the only thing we have of worth is a diagnosis, to both of your points. The advice, the feedback, the knowledge is extraordinarily valuable, and we just let it walk out.
Well, that's what veterinarians don't charge for. I worked in the last year of SmartFlow. I was working on with a group of anesthesiologists, actually developing the solution for telemedicine for anesthesia. Actually, teleconsulting we were trying to build. And every time I'm talking to anesthesiologists, there's like 150 of them in the world. And half of them, friend of mine, Craig Mosley, is in Ontario. Every time someone calls him, he picks up the phone, starts talking, gives advice. You're welcome.
Mhm.
It's like, man, you went to school for like 16 years to do
Yep,
this.
yep.
You should be charging for it. But there's a sort of, I think there is a double trouble, because he is an anesthesiologist and a Canadian. So we will do it for free and
Oh,
apologize
yeah.
after. So that's probably what happens there.
We'll definitely
Yeah.
link his phone number and email in the show notes, because I'm sure there's a lot of listeners
If
that
you
want to
Yes,
call him.
any
Yeah.
24/7 anesthesia
Yeah.
questions.
Well, Jessica, it's been a great conversation. I think we're running out of time. We always ask two questions. So one of them is there a podcast, a YouTube video, a book, or something that you watched or listened to recently that you would suggest our listeners to do as well?
No, I was sort of thinking of the question more as like what's inspired you. And for me, it always comes back to Anthony Bourdain. I love that guy.
Okay.
Yeah, everything he does comes from such a place of such authenticity. You can have all these great tools, you can cook the best meal in the world, have the greatest telemedicine platform, but you got to understand why you're doing it, and it's all about connection. And to me, that's what I loved about this like gruff, vulgar guy, is that he always brought it back to connecting with people. And to me, that's what this is all about as well.
That's totally
Great.
awesome. And then the last question we love to ask is another innovator in the veterinarian space, someone that you think we should have on our show.
Yeah, I was Hannah Cheng Lao, if you haven't yet. She was one of the very first veterinarians to work full time in telemedicine. So she's in Virginia working for a clinic in Northern California doing telemedicine. So she's awesome.
Thank you so much for listening to the Veterinary Innovation Podcast. If you want to hear about our new episodes, please follow us on any social media channel. Also, you can check out our website at veterinaryinnovationpodcast.com. See you next week.